I'm going to do a talk about hot topics in autism. This is probably the most common question I get from anyone, either in medicine or not, which is autism really rising or are we just finding it better? So the answer to that is a little bit of both. The evidence is pretty clear that the prevalence or the known presence of autism has risen a lot, dramatically over the last 2 decades. So it's now about 2.3% of all children at age 8 in the United States, which is really high. So if you think about the prevalence of things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, things that we think of common devastating psychiatric conditions, autism's prevalence is actually really high, especially in males. And that trend has been undeniable. There's a couple of key distinctions. One is that there's like classic autism, which is something that was described in the 40s, and I think we would lean more towards like nonverbal autism. There's a terminology coming out very recently called profound autism. So that presentation is not increasing. There seems to be a pretty steady number of individuals who have profound or classic autism. But we're seeing a big rise in prevalence is people who are more verbal. When we look at the broader spectrum, there's more and more numbers. There's a few general different reasons why that could happen. I mean, part of it could be that the criteria was just expanded, and therefore there's more people. Another reason could be that we're seeing it more. There's been huge progress in awareness of autism. These types of things we see every day. Choose kindness. All this awareness is that people are getting diagnosed earlier, which is really, really important. But that all traces back to awareness. The other thing is that there could be a push by some clinicians to say, hey, I'm going to put my thumb on the scale because if I say they have autism, they can get more services. So that could be leading to the increased prevalence. And then, or just plain old overdiagnosis. Has anyone in here heard of the SPARK study? Yeah, participated in that. So that's the largest trial in autism ever, and they're gathering DNA into a research community to try to discover genes that might be associated with autism, especially rare ones, because this study has gathered 200,000 individuals, and that can help you find the rare genes, such as it's only 12 people in the United States. Well, we would have never found that unless we had a sample size that big. So as that study is ongoing, we're going to discover more and more genes. So there's about 70 genes now that are known to definitively be associated or possibly cause autism. So when you step out of genetics and go into other factors, you see up there that parental age is, as it goes higher, there's more likelihood that the parents will have a child with autism. And it does go back to genetics because obviously when you have a child, you're passing your genes on. And the genes we pass on are different when we're younger versus when we're older. For example, if I was smoking since the age of 16, I had a kid at 26, I would have been a 10-year smoker. If I had a kid at 36, I'm a 20-year smoker. That changes the DNA in our bodies that we pass on. Or if I lived near something that was toxic, I would have accumulated those toxins. So there's a lot of factors that go into that. We know that birth complications, like whether it's preterm labor or infections or like a cord around the neck, a lot of bleeding afterwards, if there was a high bilirubin, if there was twins and one twin was taking blood flow from the other, on and on. There's a lot of birth complications, pregnancy-related factors. Then we get into environmental influences, which is a little bit touchy because I think everyone has a theory of, it could be this or that. And we're going to talk about vaccines later, but environmental influences means everything that's not in your body, not your genes, not something medically you have. Like it wasn't caused by my mom because she had diabetes when she was pregnant with me. This is something that's outside of all that. I kind of pointed out that as you add 10 years, there's a 20% higher risk of having a child with ASD. And that's autism spectrum disorder. Not to say that's the only thing, or that's the smoking gun. There's no smoking gun. It's just you're kind of adding risk on to all the other things that might be risk. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, so environmental air pollution. I've got question marks next to all 5 bullet points because they're not bankable causes of autism. They're not ready for prime time. But I think the first 2 are really starting to accumulate significant evidence in the literature. So when we look at air pollution and the amount of they call it particulate matter. So that's little bits of pollution that are in the air supply. Um, there does seem to be a growing concern that that could be raising the risk of autism. And again, not causing it, but people who are exposed to more pollution tend to have more autism. That's what, and I would say within the next couple of years, I could probably remove that question mark. And then pesticides in the food supply is right behind it. So you think about our lifespans have been lengthened so long, and part of that's because we have food that's not contaminated, you know, and we have things like pesticides, we have antibiotics if we want to recover from certain illnesses. But the cost of pesticides is that it, many years later, we're seeing that. Like, do the pesticides stay in the food if you wash it off? Is it in the water supply? And so forth. So that's something to be concerned about. And they found that having a lot of light at night outside your window, for example, like if you live in a place that has a lot of lights at night, it impacts our biorhythms, it impacts our sleep, it impacts the hormones that are released in kind of that circadian rhythm. And there's some concern that there are some hormonal triggers to developing autism, and that could be a factor. Valproic acid, which is called Depakote, is a seizure medication that's also used for bipolar disorder. That's commonly linked to autism, and also exposure to tobacco smoke. So.
Go up in the clouds because the view's a little nicer up here.